Hi, welcome to Every Believer Confident podcast and videocast, and we are glad that you've joined us again. I have Jeff Mindler with us again, our research assistant, and today we're going to talk about how to build an apologetics ministry in your church.
Yeah.
All right, so take it away.
Yeah, this was a topic I had suggested and been thinking about, and I'm sure just with the students that we've both had here, that's something that they often ask. So the first thing that came to my mind in thinking through starting an apologetics ministry at your church is getting the buy-in of your leadership. And talking to them about the importance of this, why it's necessary, perhaps outlining what this could look like. And it doesn't have to be, a specific pastor or staff person that is leading the charge. That would be great. To be honest, I'd love if every church had a pastor of apologetics.
That would put a lot of us into new positions.
Yeah. Although I think every pastor, in a sense, should be doing apologetics.
I think he's called to that, yeah.
Yeah. But it's not necessary to have a specific pastor who is just solely focused on that. You could have a lay person who wants to spearhead that, but having the confidence of the leaders and having their support of, hey, we really want you to do this. How can we support you? Getting that buy-in, I think that's a good first place to start, because you don't want to be continually having to justify yourself of why you do this, and you're going to continually be going against the grain, and that could be hard to continually be doing that. So I'd say the first step is getting the buy-in and support of your leadership.
And I think even maybe beyond that, there needs to be a conviction by the leaders, by the elders, by the pastors, that this is a critical part of who we are as a church. And I would argue that the greatest element missing in most good churches that are otherwise healthy is this idea of an active and effective outreach to the lost. So many churches are doing well discipling. I think of the discipleship movement that kind of began or increased in the 90s through the 2000s, where churches recognized the need to ground people in sound doctrine and provide mentorship and discipleship. But unless a church is also actively training and equipping, not just for evangelism of how to share the gospel, but how to give answers, apologetics, your church is going to be like the Dead Sea. You're going to be taking in. And I have seen that with otherwise excellent churches where there's a lot of spiritual people, spiritually mature people. You have a large body of men who can serve as elders because they're godly. They know scripture. They know sound doctrine. But very few of them are engaged in active gospel outreach with the lost. And so I think that has to become a burden for the leadership, for the elders and pastors. And you're right, it doesn't have to be one of them that takes the lead in this, but they've got to have this sense of urgency. We need to be equipping believers. We need to be encouraging people to engage unbelievers throughout the week. We need to provide resources. We need to provide opportunities. Unless that starts at the top, you're just going to have a few people who are evangelistically minded in your church constantly pushing from the back seat.
Yeah.
And you can't drive from the back seat.
Yeah.
But churches where I see that this is a high value, man, they are alive, and it affects their discipleship. It affects their gatherings, because people come excited because they've been reminded of the importance of the gospel, and they have tried to engage unbelievers throughout the week, which has challenged them. It's driven them. It's driven them back to the scriptures and to resources. So they come to church to gather, and they are fervent in their excitement about what they're doing, coming to worship God.
And Mark, in your experience, have you seen a church that maybe didn't have a large emphasis on apologetics and evangelism that has since shifted and embraced more of that type ministry? If you have, kind of what happened? What were some of the key things that fostered that change? Because I'm guessing there's might be some listening that they're in a church where they go, okay, I'd love to do this. How do I convince my leaders? Like, how do we, if it starts with them, how do we do that? And maybe perhaps if you have examples of churches you've worked with in the past that have done that, kind of what does that look like to shift from maybe an inward focus church to, all right, let's start looking outward and evangelistic and apologetics. What would that look like?
I would have to say that in my almost 20 years of doing apologetics in local churches, that I haven't seen many churches do that, make that transition. The few that I have seen, it's because those who have a passion for engagement with the lost have talked and talked and talked and tried to cast the vision. They haven't nagged, but they have, in some instances, provided their pastors opportunity for training. Because I think what is missing in most churches in regard to this is a pastor who's received good apologetics training. And in my opinion, the presuppositional approach that we talk about here is by far the best because it is accessible, it is immediately applicable, you can go right out and use it right away, and it's comprehensive in the sense that you don't have to spend years and years learning evidences and philosophical arguments. Right. So the churches that have done well in transitioning have included people that have pointed their pastors in the right direction, encouraged the leadership to provide them with opportunities like conferences or classes at a seminary, training, because once you get a taste of effectively engaging the lost, you begin to realize everyone in the church should be doing this. Mm-hmm. And that should drive us to seek to go further in our understanding of that. But unfortunately, what happens most of the time, not to turn it around to a negative, is that a church will invite me in or someone else to do an apologetics conference, thinking that that one weekend or that one day alone is going to change their church. And some people, when they find out that one weekend alone is not going to change the culture of the church, I think that they conclude, well, apologetics just doesn't work. It might work some places, but it doesn't work here. And the problem is they haven't cultivated an environment that is encouraging this. I think of a church that I've spoken at 3 times in the last 9 years. They have an apologetics conference every year. So they are maintaining this emphasis. And throughout the year, they have different adult Sunday school classes and electives that can be taken to reinforce that. So it has to start with buy-in from pastors and elders. They don't have to be the ones driving it, but they have to be convinced that we must do this. And then there has to be regular reinforcement. It's kind of like exercise.
Yeah.
You can't go to the gym and work out your hardest and then think, okay, that's going to help me. It's actually going to hurt you if you do that just one time. Right. But it's got to be the consistent reinforcing training over and over and over again, new ideas, new paths, new opportunities for people to talk about it and share their experiences. That's going to create that culture. And that's what you need. You need to create a culture of engagement with the lost.
And I wonder too, if, we talked about how a lot of pastors and just Christians are not trained on the defensive side to defend their faith. I wonder too, if we could, what the flip side of that coin is, we're not trained on how to positively proclaim and share and evangelize the faith as well. So when you have that double whammy in that sense, it really, people don't even know where to be. I surely remember the first time I went out into the city to proclaim the gospel and talk with it. Part of me was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I got to start somewhere. Right. And I wonder perhaps maybe, an idea that churches could do on top of the training is, schedule a monthly evangelism outreach down in your local town or city and just grab a few folks from the church and hand out water bottles, look for opportunities to talk with people. If you want to do open air preaching, that certainly could be a possibility if done right. We've all seen, unfortunately, what it looks like done poorly, but I think done right, that could be a great opportunity as well. Right. But that regular, having it be a monthly thing or a weekly thing, however, Providence, opens up there. But that regular, here's an opportunity for what this looks like. I think that could be a great opportunity as well.
Right. And I think that's where the leadership has to have a buy-in to say, we will schedule this, we will plan it. Again, even if it's lay people who organize it and run it. I think about a church here in Lancaster where they're every other Friday night they would go downtown or to some location and do street evangelism. And that was led by a lay person, even though the pastors, were all in on that. It was the lay person that led that. And I agree, unless you are actually engaging in conversation with unbelievers on a regular basis, you're not going to be able to maintain that fervor for it, that desire for it. Because I know that in my own life, when I go weeks or months without talking to someone about Christ, I start to lose my confidence. I start to become more apprehensive about my ability or how that other person will respond.
Yeah.
But when it's a regular thing, then my confidence is up. Even if I didn't know how to answer a question, I realize, okay, I've planted a seed of the gospel and God can use that. I want to be more prepared for next time. The regular engagement with the lost is the key. And a church needs to think through, in our context, how best can we enable and facilitate for our people regular engagement with the lost. And that looks different everywhere.
Right.
Here in Lancaster, because we have a center of our downtown, if you've never been to Lancaster City, it's a small city, but it's got a very distinct center of town. And then we have First Fridays, the first Friday of every month. Thousands of people come. So it is ready-made for conversations and engagement. So you have to think through in your own town or your own area, where can we engage people and help our people engage others of the gospel as well? And that deals primarily with engaging strangers or first time. And then there's a whole nother issue, which we'll probably do in a future podcast, is the question of how do I maintain a long-term relationship with friends and neighbors and coworkers and maintain that conversation.
Yeah, because sometimes those could be harder.
Yes.
Those
in
can be
some
the
ways they're
harder ones.
easier, in some ways they're harder.
Yeah.
So before we run out of time, any other ideas you had about a church nurturing this culture of apologetics?
Yeah, I think everything you said, trying to get the leaders to buy in, talking about it, sharing examples of, hey, I had this opportunity to talk with this person. There's a gentleman at my church who, every time he gets the opportunity to talk with me about, hey, I've been talking to this Mormon friend that I have, and just encouraging him, to press forward there and sharing resources and, hey, ask him about this, and just giving him some of those keys. But the more we can talk about it, the more we can share, like, hey, how did that conversation go? And maybe bring some other folks in who might be interested, and you really kind of naturally spreading, that the word there. But trying to talk about it regularly.
Good. I've got 3 more things to help nurture that culture. Number 1, I think the churches that are most effective in this tend to have church bookstores where they provide opportunities. Again, this church I go to that I've been to 3 times in the last 9 years, they have when they built their new building, they built a bookstore in the front of the church right when you walk in, and a lot of the titles are on apologetics. So they're constantly encouraged, and they keep it up. It's not like, we're selling books from the 90s and 2000s. It's recent books. Secondly, I think in the gathered worship of the church, there needs to be opportunity for testimonies of people that have engaged unbelievers well. I know for me, whenever I hear someone tell a story of an opportunity that they had, I think, oh, I could have done that, or I could say that. And we've just we've lost that in our programmed worship services where we have no congregational involvement. And then thirdly, I think this would be a challenge to pastors and elders. Find the people in your church who have the most passion for engagement with the lost and spend some money. Send them to a conference. pay for tuition for a class at a seminary or somewhere where they can gain more knowledge and help and bless your church. Like, think of this as an investment.
Yeah.
We have this person who's so interested and they're dedicated. What can we do to help them go further so that they can bless our church? Every church needs a resident expert in engagement with the lost. Can you imagine then if every church has someone that they say, we can look to this person if we have questions because they're doing the work, they're reading the books, they're keeping up with things, they're practicing this, and they're the local expert. That, I think, is one of the most important keys to developing a culture in your church.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that local investment, and then they can help train and get others to come out too. And I mean, then you just, the multiplication effect that can have.
That's right.
Yeah, I love that. Investing in, your local expert, your local church expert in evangelism and apologetics.
Right. Every church needs a resident Jeff Mindler. Well, I hope that this episode has helped you think through for your own church. And our prayer is that every Bible-believing church in the world will be effective in engaging the lost with the gospel.